Hello, everyone, and welcome to season 3 of Taking Back the Narratives podcast. So, this season, we are focusing on the post October 7th genocide and the current realities and future realities of both Israel and the Jewish population worldwide. With that, I am very honored to introduce my very first guest of the season, Naomi Reinharz. So, Naomi, we've been friends for a while. I've known you through the Jewish space collectively for years and years. And currently, I know that you are working very hard as the CEO of the American Society of the University of Haifa. So, first, I want to say a very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for being my very first guest in this very complex time that we're living in. And if you could introduce yourself to our audience, just a little bit more of your professional background, what led you to your current position, that would be wonderful.
Sure. It's great to see you, Lorene, on Zoom. Hopefully I'll see you in person soon in New York, and you're welcome to visit me anytime you'd like in Florida. We've known each other for years, and it's been really great for me to see you evolve in your career and really grow this organization into what it is today. And I'm sure it'll continue to grow and flourish in the future as well. So thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here as well. I know we've been talking about doing this podcast for a while, pre-October 7th. Of course, so much has changed since October 7th, and I look forward to speaking with you about that. As you mentioned, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of ASUH, the American Society of the University of Haifa. I've been in that role for 14 months. I run all of the operations and fundraising for University of Haifa for the United States. I came to that role over I guess, having sort of two stages of my career. I started out as an attorney practicing corporate litigation in Manhattan. Like many attorneys, I was not very content in that work. And I was so active as a volunteer lay leader in the Jewish and pro-Israel space in New York, as well as nationally and globally, really. And I just found myself gravitating more towards that world. And I decided that working in this field would be sort of the best of both worlds, where my career and my work every day really doesn't feel like a job. It feels like my passion and what I'm destined to do. And I discovered fundraising. I fell in love with fundraising, and I sort of moved up the ranks in fundraising for various national and global Jewish and Israeli organizations. And I found myself now, for the first time, as a CEO of the American Society of the University of Haifa. And I love it. It's been a really intense and exciting and interesting 14 months, and I'm really excited to see what we can do in the future as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. And first of all, I want to tell my audience that Naomi is basically the point person within the Jewish world. You go to any organization, you mention her name, and everyone just knows about you.
Oh,
So I wanted to highlight
I
that feature
appreciate
as
that.
well. And yeah, so this is just like a very natural role for you. Just having known you for many years, it was inevitable that eventually you would be the CEO. And looking
Yeah.
forward to where your own, profession leads you. It's just up and up and up from here. So before we address the elephant in the room, which of course is October 7th, let's take a step back and just talk about Zionism in general and the importance of Zionism to each of us. I know that we have different stories, different trajectories. I'll start with myself. For those not familiar, I actually was anti-Israel. Well, and I'll temper that a little bit. I was not those crazy GVP people marching to support Hamas. Okay, so it wasn't that intense. So now, since October 7th and seeing the craziness out there, madness, so to say, I have sort of changed the vocabulary to say that I was fairly anti Israel for 20 years. And in which ways? I repeated anti Semitic lies that I heard in the media, that I heard in the Jewish organizations that I was involved in due to anti Semitic terminology like settlements, Palestinians, West Bank, and all of that, Palestine. So, in a lot of the friend groups that I was in post college, I typically was the only Jewish person, which is a little insane considering that I moved to New York right after college. And in New York, as many of you know, until the pandemic, I know we lost a lot of Jews here. I think something like 500,000 Jews left out of 2 million, but still it remains a very Jewish metropolis. But the activities that I chose to join were very non-Jewish. So whenever Israel was on the news, my friend groups, who were not anti-Semitic, they were just generally curious, they would turn to me and say, "Oh, Israel is in the news for XYZ. I don't know what's going on. Could you explain to me?" And very enthusiastically, I would offer up, "Oh, well, it's a settlement. So if only Israel stopped building the settlements, um, there would be peace." That was just my thinking, right? Just what the New York Times said. It's what the Economist said. It's invariably not so directly what some of the Jewish groups were saying, right? Like the two-state solution, this is all that's missing. The Palestinians and the Jews, the Palestinians, right? Palestine and Israel, Israel and Palestine. So all of that together was the perfect storm for my ignorance, thinking that what I was receiving were facts, and then repeating those lies that I didn't think were lies. I thought that that was the truth, and sharing it amongst my peers. And so I had, and by the way, this was despite me growing up in a fairly Zionist home. My parents are political refugees from the former USSR. Anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism was very much prevalent when they were growing up in the 50s and 60s. One of the reasons they left, not only because they were vehemently against communism, but because they were tired of being called Žid all the time, which is the equivalent of being called kike, of not getting jobs because they were Jews, not getting certain apartments because they were Jews. Uh, their teachers would lower grades because they were Jews, right? And there were quotas in the university systems back then in Russia. So all of it was, as you know, related to not only the Russian population being anti-Semitic for 2,000 years, almost 2,000 years from the start of Christianity, but also because of their hatred of Israel and Operation Sig, and you know what that is, and we'll get into that at another time. So I didn't grow up hating Israel. I had my bat mitzvah in Israel on top of the Masada, transliterated. I didn't know I was a Jew until I was 7, 8 years old. When I found out, I begged to go to Hebrew school. I don't know if you know the story, Naomi. My parents refused to send me to Hebrew school because they didn't like the rabbi. He was too liberal. So I begged and begged, and I said, "Oh, my babysitting money will pay for a Hebrew school tutor," not understanding it was a lot more. And so they said, "No, forget about it. We're taking our first trip to Israel. Your first international trip. You'll have your bat mitzvah there. We'll hire a rabbi. It'll be fine." And it was. It was a wonderful time. I felt really special in Israel, like not really understanding why. And I was then pro-Israel for a year. And then from 14 to the age of 32, all of that noise came into my life. And this culminated with Natan Sharansky coming to town in 2013. And he was speaking at Temple Emmanuel. And I only went because I wanted to hear him basically explain what Israel is going to do about those damn settlements. And he didn't address it in his speech. So I raised my hand so high and proud at the end. And I wanted to confront him about the settlements. And another man who was obviously just as ignorant, another Jewish man, he raised his hand first and he asked that question about the settlements. And Natan said, "There are no such thing as settlements. Those are legal Jewish communities." And I left in disgust. I don't know if I had told you this before. And the whole walk home, I was just thinking, oh, Israel just sent him as this Hasbara agent. How dare they? How dare he lie to the Jews in America? I mean, this was the craziness that I was, ensconced in back then. And then I had my aha moment in 2014 during the first Hamas war. And I came home from work, turned on CNN, and I saw that they were not giving any airtime to anyone from Israel, but they kept highlighting these Hamas terrorist leaders. And something within me realized back then, even with all of my anti-Israel sentiment, something's not right. I want to learn more about this region, about Israel. So I did. I started learning historical information. started sharing with my peers. And over the years, it grew into a Zionism education company. So that was my journey, and would love to find out your own.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I knew pieces of that, but I didn't know the full story. So thanks for sharing that. And you mentioned Natan Sharansky. I sort of joke that Sharansky sort of took away the limelight from me at my own bat mitzvah. Back when I was 13, he was invited to my bat mitzvah. He was a professor at the time, visiting professor at Brandeis University. And I liked having all the attention on me, of course, at age 13, as I still do. And he walks into the room, and obviously he's short in stature, but big in his presence. And suddenly the rest of my bat mitzvah, everyone was sort of surrounding him and asking questions and asking for his autograph. And I said, what about me? But I had the pleasure of years later, speaking of my transition in my career, my first job in the Jewish world after I was an attorney was as chief of staff for the Jewish Agency for Israel in North America. And Natan Sharansky was pretty much my boss. He was the chair of the board or the executive committee, I believe, at the time. And the Jaffe was trying to figure out its new identity, as it used to be very focused, obviously, on Aliyah and immigration absorption. And over time, that was less of an imperative and other things became more important. So I got to work closely with him, years later, and it was a nice sort of full circle moment for me. Anyway, that's my Natan story. But yeah, my journey is very different from yours. I was born in Michigan, and at age 1, we moved to the Boston area. A very, very Jewish community in Newton, Mass, who I'm sure many of your audience know very well. I think Newton was something like 30 or 40% Jewish. I went to a Jewish day school through 8th grade, and then a public high school, which was maybe a third Jewish, I think. We lived for 1 year in Israel. When my parents were on sabbatical in Jerusalem, I became fluent in Hebrew, both from living there and from Jewish day school. During high school, I went to Hebrew school. I went to Jewish camps, summers in Israel, a lot of family and friends in Israel. My dad was born in Israel in Haifa. My mom was born in Holland to Holocaust survivors, and then they moved to Haifa. So again, a lot of extended family and friends in Israel, and it was just a part of who I was. I've been an Israeli citizen my whole life. I have an Israeli passport that I use when I go there. I've been to Israel many, many times on my own with various fellowships, organizations, teen tours, just, for fun, now for work. So I never really questioned Israel. It was just part of who I am. I'm an Israeli American, or half, I guess, but a full citizen. And I never saw it as a political identity or a political issue. It was just, I guess, my culture, and I know the language, and it was just important to me, just like America was important to me. The only time that Israel became relevant or sort of a question in my mind was when I went to college. I went to Brown University undergrad. I'm sure many of you know, given especially what's going on now, although it's not new. Brown is a very political campus, and a very liberal campus. It's actually under investigation now, along with many other Ivy League and other universities. I'd like to say it's actually not the worst of the worst right now, which is still not a great thing to say, but it's up there. Maybe Columbia or Harvard is sort of number 1 right now. But I do want to, that's a whole separate conversation. If you want to go there, we do have a very supportive president, Christina Paxson, who's a convert to Judaism, but there is a lot of problems within the university, regardless. So, however, Brown is also one of the few Ivies where the Jewish population has been increasing rather than decreasing. They have been actively recruiting Jewish students, including Orthodox students. There's a very active and strong Hillel and Chabad. They are doing their best, in my opinion, to make it a good place on campus, but there are unfortunately certain faculty members who have tenure and certain students who are still being inappropriate and wrong in their behavior on campus. That's a separate conversation. But my time at Brown, I came into Brown assuming that I was just like everyone else, a liberal, student from the Northeast, professors who were teaching, the same thing that you mentioned about the settlements or about Israel as a colonial state, or the oppressor versus oppressed, and all those same narratives that we hear today, many years later. Those things were happening when I was on campus. On top of that, the Second Intifada began, the Iraq War began. This was 2002. And suddenly Israel went from just being a sort of innocuous part of my life to something that I had to think about more consciously or actively. And suddenly I had to defend that part of who I am. I then studied abroad my junior year, second semester in Madrid, Spain, and I started seeing swastikas when I walked to class. I started seeing anti-Israel protests that were sometimes violent and scary to me. I wasn't actively, identifying as Israeli or Jewish, but I also wasn't hiding it. And it came up in conversation sometime. I had never in my life, felt scared to be Jewish or Israeli. Maybe the only time before that was when we lived in Israel when I was a child. It was during the first Intifada, 87, 88. And there were times I remember, when I felt and saw violence being perpetrated against myself, my neighbors, nothing where I ever felt in real danger, but it was there. So when I came back to campus my senior year, I started a pro-Israel organization on campus, Brown Students for Israel. It hadn't existed before. There was a group called Friends of Israel, but they were doing, sort of cultural days on campus where they handed out hummus and pita. And it was nice, but it wasn't, pro-Israel content. I started bringing speakers, many of whom I thought were not controversial, like Thomas Friedman, who, these days would be considered probably on the left. But to Brown students,
was he more conservative back then, or was he always anti-Israel, or what we would now consider
back then I thought he was kind of a centrist. I thought he was.
I agree with you because I read, and not to interject, but I guess
Sure.
to interject, did you read his book Lexus and the Olive Tree?
Yeah.
To me, that was the most centrist piece of work. And
Yeah, there was several
what
books.
happened to him?
Yeah, and his op-eds, I think, have changed over time as well. But I think he was a very well-respected, person, writer, academic. I thought, compared to other speakers who came to campus, like Daniel Pipes, I mean, Thomas Friedman was a softie, and there were some others we brought like an Ethiopian singing group. I mean, I didn't think the people we brought were controversial or problematic. But what was interesting to me was even those people who I thought were very vanilla when it came to Israel, because again, I was still not super political. I just wanted to have pro-Israel activity on campus. Even they got pushback from my classmates and professors. And I remember, given what was going on at the time in the Middle East, I worked with some of my friends who joined BSI with me. We did a petition that, again, very kind of like plain language saying I support Israel and its struggle right now, something like that. Nothing anti anyone else. And I tried to get friends of mine to sign it, some of whom are Jews, and a lot of them wouldn't sign it. They felt uncomfortable. They were afraid of their reputation being tarnished because of it. They didn't know what other people would think. And it just sort of like what you said earlier, like I started to realize how even the mention of Israel caused fear and trepidation and discomfort in people. And it really was a wake-up call for me. So I'm very proud to say that BSI still exists today, 20 years after I graduated. I'm in touch with some of the current leaders and participants in it. We're part of a very active Brown WhatsApp group, and we're doing Zooms and a lot of conversations and really working hard to make Brown a safe and positive place for Jewish and pro-Israel students. But I think my time at Brown, for better or for worse, really changed me. And I took an internship after college at the American Jewish Committee. Going into Brown, I never thought I would work in the Jewish world. I started off as a math major, then an English major, and it never occurred to me that I would go into an advocacy organization or even a Jewish or pro-Israel organization. I went to law school, like I said, and became a lawyer because it was a good career and I was interested in law and policy. as well. But like I said, I shortly after practicing law for a little bit, I quickly realized that it was not my career, and this what I'm doing now is really what I'm meant to do. So I don't know if I'd gone to a campus. I almost went to Penn, which is another story given what's going on there now. But at the time, it was a very pro-Jewish and pro-Israel university. And I do wonder if I'd gone to a school that was at the time less difficult to be pro-Israel. I wonder if my trajectory might have been different. I'm not sure. But I think Brown sort of pushed me to become a more pro-Israel activist than I would have been otherwise.
I absolutely can see that. And it's so interesting because you and I are about the same age. So we're talking about 20 years ago. I had such a different undergrad experience. Well, I'll parcel it by this. So my first year of college, I was at Temple University in Philadelphia. So I only experienced anti-Semitism from one or two people, but it was the classic blood libel anti-Semitism. This one girl, I again didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did neither. And I sat on her bed for 2 hours and just like taught her about Jews. She actually asked me two questions. Why did Jews kill Jesus? And is it true that Jews used to have horns? Like I had never, like I heard about that in books, but not in real life. So I just sat in her bed as freshmen do. I literally had a conversation with her for a couple hours. And while we were having conversation, the door was open and all these other people were piling in, people who were also Black and urban, like this girl who apparently, like this girl had confessed to me, I was the first Jew that she'd ever met. And she grew up in Philadelphia, where there is a Jewish population. So it just shows you how segregated. And I don't mean like racially, but I mean like in terms of just different groups. You can go, like, I'm sure, like here in New York, you can go your whole life living in New York and never meet a Jew. It's possible, so so that was my only experience, and then I transferred to American University. I was in the business school. None of our classes were political at all, and I wasn't looking for it, but I also didn't see any anti-Semitism at all, like nothing anti-Israel. But the difference is, like, you started your group. By the way, your Jewish leadership skills were obviously showing back then, the roots of them. But at American, Hillel was so strong back then. There was one point where the Muslim Student Association showed up on the quad to protest. Something was going on with Israel. I don't even can't even remember. So this was 2003. So whatever was happening in 2003, within 5 minutes, Hillel showed up strongly. Protest was over. And that's a far cry from the Hillel that I saw at Columbia University when I went to grad school. I remember seeing a swastika and a fuck you Israel in the girls' bathroom. So I went to the administration to say something. They ignored me. I contacted Hillel. They ignored me. So I found the Israel engagement director at Hillel. I had a whole email exchange with her. So she invites me to coffee and she's like, look, I'm Israeli. I served in the IDF. I could not be more pro Israel, but there's nothing we can do. So, mind you, this was 10 years ago, 11 years ago. So she's like, there's nothing we can do because our board, our Hillel board, is anti Israel. We are dealing, she said, with the J Street people for them not to become JVP. They refuse to fly the flag of Israel outside, like all the other, ethnic houses do, right? Like the Brazilian house, the Japan house, all of that. Not only do they not want to fly the flag of Israel outside, they refuse to fly the flag of Israel inside. So it's coming from within. And then SSI was on campus, I remember the following year. But like you mentioned about hummus, right? Like the cultural exchange. So while apartheid week was happening, and they're showing pictures of the dead kids from the Syrian civil war, trying to pass it off as the dead Arab kids in Gaza. And everyone walking by believes them because why wouldn't you, right? SSI is shouting "Humus not Hamas," as if that's teaching anything to anyone passing by. But this is what I mean. Like, so you already saw the strength of what it takes to educate about Israel, is what I like to call, right? Because like, if you let me get your take on this, and then we'll get right into October 7th. Do you think that the majority of people who are anti-Israel, because I have my own opinion, would love to get yours. Do you think the majority of people who are anti-Israel legitimately hate Israel because they hate Jews, or because they're just processing the information that's being fed to them?
So when I was at Brown, I don't remember a single incident of anti-Semitism. Like I said, when I lived in Spain and traveled all over Spain, I did see swastikas and saw things where, the anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment was either blurred or one and the same.
Mm.
I did not experience that at Brown. I only experienced anti-Israel sentiment, or at least questioning of Israel. That's all changed from what I'm hearing. Obviously, I'm not on college campuses all the time. And also for law school, I was at Georgetown, by the way, where I don't remember a single anti-Israel or anti-Jewish sentiment or activity. Now, Georgetown has been exposed, as I already knew back then, by the way, but it's been exposed as for all the
And they
money
also and they
it's
also
getting.
moved to the left as well
Correct, but
a
it's also,
lot.
yeah, correct. But like many other, top universities, it's been exposed for the money it's been getting from Qatar and other countries, and what is it doing with that money? All those questions. And I've heard about anti-Israel stuff happening there, although I don't know a lot of the details like I do for Brown.
Mhm.
But I think now, and since I was in college and grad school, that's changed.
Mhm.
Everything that I've seen and read and watched, and I've, like many of us, been inundated and overwhelmed by the amount of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel stuff happening since October 7th, obviously before as well. But I think that that whole line has been erased, and there's been a lot of excuses in the past, I think, for oh, I'm not anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish, I'm just anti-Israel or anti-Zionist. And it's been easy for people to say that. And I think there is something to that. I do think there is legitimacy in
Mhm.
questioning Israel. Even if they say things I don't agree with, anyone can question anything. They can question a country just like I can question Syria, or I can question China, or I can question Brazil for some things that they say or do. It doesn't mean that I hate the people from that country or the religions in that country. And that's still legitimate for Israel. People are allowed to criticize. We always say that Israelis are the most vocal critics of their own country and their own government, and that's fine. Just like Americans should be vocal of their country or their leaders. However, we've seen obviously that separation has narrowed to the
Mhm.
point now where you see constantly people yelling hateful things towards Jews,
Right.
attacking Jews this week at Berkeley, for instance. You see the testimonies in Congress, all the investigations that are being done right now for Title VI violations. I'm not saying that every anti-Semite is anti-Israel or every anti-Zionist is anti-Semitic. However, they're much more one and the same than they ever were.
I guess like from my perspective, because again, like I was myself on the spectrum, right? I guess what I see in my world is that not that there's a difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, one and the same. I don't question that. What I'm questioning, not questioning, but what I'm trying to tie together again from we can see different things, right? Like we work, although we work in the same space, but different populations is that because people hate Israel for the lies that they're misinformation that they're hearing, that then leads them to hate Jews, right? So it's like from what I'm seeing, it's like, okay, so if Israel's again, we're putting everything in quotes because these are lies. If Israel's occupying Palestine, right? Jews are from Europe. We obviously know that's not true, but if Jews are from Europe, Jews were gone for 2,000 years, which obviously we know that's not true. There's always been a Jewish continuous presence in the land of Israel for 4,000 years since Jews emerged from the Semitic tribes and formed a nation. But, again, the ignorant think like we were just gone for 2,000 years. And I'll give you a personal example. My brother in law, who's not anti Semitic, years ago said to me, well, if the Jews were exiled for 2,000 years and they came back and the Arabs lived on that land, so when they came back, now they took the Arabs' land. So in his, again, not anti Semitic, he doesn't hate our family, but in his mind, what he said makes perfect sense, right? It's like, okay, so now you came back, yet you used to be your land. Now it's someone else's land, apparently, right? So that then makes people hate Jews. It's like, oh my gosh, like you stole their land. Uh, it's their, it's their provenance, right? The Palestinian. This is why, again, like semantics is so, so important. And I see it every day because so like if people understood that Jews who lived in Israel from 136 AD to 1948 were called Palestinians. And if we start calling the Arabs in Gaza and the Arabs in Judea and Samaria what they are, Arab occupiers, there's no other word for them, on Jewish land, that would change the narrative, right? Like, it obviously, it starts with us, Jews, and then that can trickle down or up to the media, to publications, to policies in Congress. And so, like, I see, like, right now, like, even like very well-meaning politicians will say, like, oh yeah, like, we support Israel, but we also support Palestine. I'm thinking, where the hell's Palestine, right? Like, Palestine is Israel. That was just, it's just a colonizer term for Israel. It was a colonizer term for those 1,812 years. So another thing I really wanted to emphasize to the audience, and I'm sure you agree too, saying Israel's political, right, is something that I think would be best if we collectively, we as Jews, get away from, right? Because how come no other country is political? Like you mentioned, right? Like America, yeah, you can have opinions of America, you can have opinions about India, Brazil, China, like all those things, but they're still not political. Those are just your opinions, right? But when a country turns political, like you mentioned, those are great examples. Oh, well, you know, I don't want to, as a Jew on campus, I'm afraid of defend, or I hate the word defending, support. I don't want to support Israel because, oh, it's political, right? And now it's going to affect my grades. Now it's going to affect my job opportunities after college. And now it's going to affect my associations. Did you see that video that was going around? I believe it was last week. If not, I have to send it to you. It was a man who came to the campus of UPenn waving this giant, did you see it? Waving the giant Israeli flag.
Yeah.
And this Jewish student, right, confronts him. And he's like, what are you doing? This is dangerous to the Jews on campus. And the guy with the Israeli flag is defending himself, doing that. He's like, well, like, I'm a proud Jew. Like, what are you doing? And he like starts yelling and cursing at the guy, saying, how dangerous this is, like, for us. And he basically, and then the guy with the Israeli flag calls him a coward, which it is. It's like, if you're not willing to, again, not defend, but to support the right side of history during the most evil of evils, then that's a you problem. That's
Yeah.
not an Israel problem.
Yeah, and I think we can, debate certain terms. Like I don't use some of the terms that you mentioned, which is fine. I think there's room, wiggle room among how we use semantics, how we use words, how we use phrases. There's a spectrum there, which is fine. But I think I read something like 80% or so of Americans are Zionists, right? So I think a lot of anti-Semites these days are using that fact by saying, okay, so maybe I'm not anti-Semitic, but if 80% or so of American Jews and maybe even more than 80% of global Jews are pro-Israel and are Zionists, and half of the world's Jews live in Israel, so they're obviously Zionists, they say, then I'm not, I'm not by default an anti-Semite, but I hate Israel and all these Jews love Israel, so then Jews are the problem, right?
Right.
And they say, oh, I like Jews who are anti-Israel, the Jews for ceasefire or the JVPs or the If Not Now people, right? Even though some of them are not even Jews who are part of these organizations, that's another conversation. But I think it's an excuse. And Israel is a pariah. Jews support that pariah. Therefore, Jews are the enemy. So it's sort of
hate. Exactly.
And I think, and speaking of Natan Sharansky, who's such a vocal person on this topic, he one of his books, he talks about that, the 3 Ds, which I might mess up right now, but it's delegitimization, and there's 2 others that I have to remember, but it's basically turning Israel into a pariah state. And why only Israel? And his point is sort of that if you do that to every other country in the world, many of which have many worse human rights violations than Israel ever will or ever had, it's fine if you're equally critical of every other, all the other hundreds of countries around the world who are doing terrible things, or have done terrible things, maybe to their people or to other people. But if you're only focused on Israel, this, which is the only Jewish country in the world, then you might be anti-Semitic, you know?
And it's true. And also and obviously Natan Sharansky's background, and to the audience who may not, he was from, or not from, his family spent a lot of the diaspora in the Soviet Union. And so those Jews, and especially I go after Jews so hard because again, like in my field that I'm in right now, I deal with Jews and non-Jews. And so I don't even blame a lot of the non-Jews because they'll say like, oh, I was talking to a Jewish friend and he's anti-Israel and he's talking about, that there is a Palestine and on and on and on. So how can we blame a lot of the non-Jews who get their misinformation? That's what I was doing for 20 years to my non-Jewish friends. So those who are legitimately just repeating the lies that they hear from their Jewish peers, then that's on us, right? It's like on us, like no effect. So then those Jews, like you mentioned, JVP, if not now, plethora of other groups who, like when now, like whenever I see like now protests, who is being arrested? Those are JVP. Those are mostly half, whatever, Jews. Some of them are not Jews. I know that. That's still shocking that they're being accepted at these organizations. And that's embarrassing. Like, I'm not even angry at them as much. I mean, I'm angry, but it's like the embarrassment. It's like, oh my gosh, like I do not identify with you, and I cannot believe that you're a part of my people, because how could any people be against their homeland? And this is a phenomenon that we only see in the Indian culture. Like I have Indian friends who say this, like in the like Indian subcontinent culture, in the Hindu culture specifically, and the Jewish culture. Like no other, you will never find an Italian who's anti-Italy or a Frenchman who's anti-France, like despite all of the disagreements they may have with their history, their government, and all that. So so the reason I use the terminology, and I didn't say Arab occupiers until October 7th and afterwards, and I'll tell you why. Because we have a lot of what they call themselves pro-Israel advocates. A lot of them are actually slogan Zionists. They'll say like free Gaza from Hamas, as if that's going to do something, not realizing that's the population that's the problem, because who is Hamas? It's the Gazan population. They're not some foreign entity that just like flew in by nightfall and landed in Hamas. So before then, I called them Gazans. Before October 7th, I called the Arabs in Judea and Samaria Arabs under the PA rule. But then you realize, honestly, it's an us versus them. And, the Arab occupied, like, I think it's important to, again, this is my strong opinion. It's fine if we disagree, but I think we need to label the actual issue. And if we don't, if we pretend that, okay, these are Palestinians and we're Israelis, as if it's some separate notion. First of all, it's a lie against our own history that Gaza has been Jewish land, still is under Article 80 of the UN Charter. That land is being occupied. Judea and Samaria, 2/3 of it, are being occupied. And so, unless Israel deals with the population in Gaza, which was not invited to be there, has not lived peacefully with Jews. I mean, the Arabs there have been killing Jews, as you know, since 1936. First, it was because of the British; they were fomenting those riots. Then it was the Egyptians. Then, even under Israeli rule, 1987, what happened? The Intifada. Despite being under Israeli rule, they still launched the first Intifada. And then, why I don't call the Israeli Arabs in Israel Arab occupiers, because they're not. They chose to stay in Israel, a lot of them, and we'll get into this a little bit later. But a lot of them over the years stopped calling themselves Palestinians, and only those who hate Jews and hate Israel call themselves such. I have many Israeli Arab friends online, some in person, and they recoil at being called Palestinian. And they're like, why are these leaders like calling us Palestinians? We were not. So it's very much tied to Jew hate, and those that occupy our land are the ones who are calling for our destruction the loudest. So I think that thinking needs to shift in order for Israel to actually achieve peace, not peace with those in Gaza, because that's never going to happen, not peace with those in Judea and Samaria, that's never going to happen, but safety for its population, the Jews, the Muslims, the Christians, and everyone else living in Israel. Because if we're going to play pretend with something that's never going to be a reality, I think that adds to the problems. So that's why I shifted my mindset after October 7th.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
I appreciate what you're saying. And I think, again, there's like, we don't agree on everything.
right, right.
But I think it's important now. I mean, one thing that you've seen
Mm,
since October 7th, someone asked me the other day, is there anything good that's happened from this tragedy? Before October 7th, what was in the news all the time was the protests against
mm,
judicial reform, and people were worried about a civil war, imminently happening in Israel. There were hundreds of thousands of people. Israel is a small country. To have protests of that magnitude in a country of that size is, huge. And a lot of people I know in Israel were really focused on that and were going to those protests all the time. And it was really dividing people. Since October 7th, you don't hear a word about that. I
right.
haven't, at least. All I hear about is what happened on October 7th. How can we help everyone in Israel who's affected in some way? Because everyone in Israel is affected in some way.
Of course.
What can we do to help? Everyone's volunteering. Everywhere I go, I see people. I live in Miami now. I see people with Jewish stars, with chais, with a
The
necklace
map
like
of Israel
what,
here.
like, yeah, similar
Yeah.
necklaces, the bracelets, the bring them home, necklace. I just see people actively, portraying their Jewish pride. I considered for a day maybe taking down my mezuzah because I was afraid, on this global jihad day that was announced. My mezuzah is nailed so hard into my doorpost that I don't think anyone could ever remove it. I've been going to more Shabbat dinners. I've been going to more. I mean, I thought I was pretty Jewish already, but now,
Like
you know,
increase
it's on the next level of Judaism. And I see that with almost everyone I know, and including among friends of mine who were not very active Jews before. I mean, obviously, I still have some Jewish friends who are quiet Jews or very secular Jews, and I'm not religious myself, but I would say the vast majority of the people I know have become at least, more inclined towards their Judaism, posting more on social media, reading more, asking more questions, going to more Jewish events and all that. That's the only, I guess, positive, so to speak. And the fact that I think people have set aside a lot of our differences. And I appreciate that you used a word that I do agree with, Jew hatred or phrase. I heard Brooke Goldstein speak last week, who's the founder of End Jew Hatred and of the Lawfare Project. And I think that's one example of a phrase we should all be using. Anti-Semitism is obviously a word that a lot of us know, but a lot of people don't know what that means and get confused. No one, most people don't know what a Semite is or Semitism. Everyone knows what Jew means, and that's really what it is. It's Jew hatred and calling it for what it is.
or if we do say anti-Semitism in writing, it's so important not to include the hyphen, because without the hyphen, anti and then Semites, that includes Arabs. And I forgot the name of the journalist. You can help me if you recall. It was a German journalist in the late 1800s. He saw already like the anti-Semitism, and when anti-Semitism was being written about, Arabs were being included in this. And he's like, no, 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 that this hate is not against Arabs. This hate is against Jews. So there has to be a phrase coined to only talk about the hate against Jews. So that he said, okay, anti-Semitism without the hyphen. And luckily the AP style guide changed their rule on anti-Semitism a couple years ago. So AP style guide is without the hyphen. So it'd be really helpful if Jewish publications were to follow that rule. I submit things to JNS and then they'll change to the hyphen, but I'll submit op-eds to American Thinker, which is not Jewish. They accept it as is.
Interesting.
It comes from within us. So let's talk about the day. Where were you when you found out? What was going through your mind?
I woke up on Saturday, October 7th, to a barrage of messages from friends of mine, Americans, Israelis, Jews, non-Jews, saying, "Are you okay? Where are you? What's going on?" All these, and I had no idea what was happening yet because I hadn't read the news. Um, I started being like, yeah, I'm okay. What are you talking about? And then I started to get all the notifications and see what I'd missed during the night, and was overwhelmed with just questions, confusion, sadness, fear, anger, hurt, everything. I think it was still too early to really know what was happening on a full scale, because even the news, when I turned it on, didn't quite understand what was happening. As I mentioned, I have a lot of family, friends, colleagues in Israel. I started talking to them directly, and started getting more information. I went about my day, doing the things I normally do on a Saturday, um, which does not involve work or Israel or or Jewish stuff, and just enjoying my life here, but still kind of muddied by the situation and trying to understand it. I hung out with friends a lot that night, some Jews, some non-Jews. One of whom actually is a Palestinian from Gaza, a friend of mine here, who
Or
is
from an Arab from, I just want to interject. So he's an Arab from Gaza because
so
there are no
we
Palestinians.
yeah so we that's a whole separate conversation. We met playing beach volleyball, which I play a lot of here. And we have a nice relationship. And we don't really get into politics, and we hung out that day, despite what was going on. So I that day was, it was strange, but it was not super out of the ordinary for me. The next day, once things were a little more clear and a little more um, settled on what was actually happening, that's when I really started to freak out. More on a personal level than anything else. I started to really panic and have anxiety, and I started crying. I called more of my relatives. I was somewhat of a zombie that day, and couldn't really function. I remember going to the pool in my complex and just trying to like sit there and decompress a little bit. And I heard people speaking Hebrew nearby in the pool. So maybe I wouldn't have done this pre-October 7th, but I just naturally found myself walking up to them and saying, hi, Atem Yisraelim, or, and introduce myself. And they're like, Ken, and we ended up talking for an hour. I ended up hugging them. They invited me over, later. I was very fortunate to just meet some Israelis in my building who I'd never met before. I did call my parents. My father immediately planned to, his next flight to Israel to go spend a couple of weeks there and do what he could on the ground, which also put fear in me because it was, becoming a war zone, and I was afraid of my father being there. And luckily he was okay and has been back since then again. And then of course I was in touch with my colleagues at the university to see what was going on at the university, how we were affected, what I could do to help, et cetera, and sort of wearing my CEO hat on that day, because it was at that point Sunday and a work day. But yeah, my life, like many Jews and many Israelis and Israeli Americans, really is not the same pre and post October 7th. Ever since that day, everything has changed for me. I already, like I said, had very strong opinions and had been very active in this world, but everything has been magnified in many ways since then.
And were you able to, because I know you have so many family members in Israel, like, were you able to get in touch with a lot of them?
Yeah, one of my mom's cousins there, I have family on both sides, and literally all across Israel, from secular to religious, everything in between, all ages. One of my mom's cousins, Nurit, who I'm in touch with and have stayed with and spent time with. I saw her last time I was in Israel. One of her grandchildren was at the Nova Festival. That's just one example of a story, and it's a whole long story, but he, thank God, survived by hiding in the nearby forest for hours while people around him were being raped, abducted, and murdered. She didn't know what was going on with him for a day. They had been up all night, partying and drinking. Their phones were not charged. I mean, it was just chaos and madness. Long story short, he ended up making it back home to them the following day, and it was obviously a miracle and wonderful that he survived. Many others around him did not. That's just one example. I also have couple dozen second and third cousins in the reserves right now, in the
Wow,
military.
I saw your list. It was so long. I was like, oh my gosh. So have you guys like heard from them
So
since?
far, I'll knock on whatever I can knock on. So
Knock on wood.
far, So far, they're okay. No news is good news. Obviously, not everyone can be in touch when they're in Gaza or when they're at war because of communications and security
Can
issues.
I ask a little bit about that, just like for my sense of knowledge, plus the audience as well? So I see some of my friends who served in Gaza, like they're posting like left and right. I also see posts from my friends who are army wives, and they haven't heard from their husbands since end of October. So is it just certain units? Like, is it like the more, for lack of a better words, like the more like elite units that they're non communicado for the past couple of months, and the some reservists can like have? Do you know how that all
Yeah,
works?
I don't know
Yeah,
all the details of it. My understanding is that it depends the unit, it depends where exactly you are, what exactly you're doing, intelligence or not intelligence, where in Gaza you are, the security aspects of your operations and et cetera. Obviously, some of them can come home from time to time and some of them can be in touch or
right.
I
It
don't,
just it's
yeah,
weird, like this. I don't like, some units like just like live in their tanks, and other
yeah,
units like come back and forth and go to the
right.
barbecues and have
Right.
like
Right.
get
Yeah. There's a
rejuvenated.
huge variety. Yeah. Yeah. And
But
of course, I think something like 300,000, I believe, reservists were called up after October 7th. Another 60,000 people volunteered.
volunteered,
That
yeah.
is a massive, I mean, there's around 15 million or so Jews worldwide. I mean, that's a massive percentage of the Jewish world. And I shouldn't actually, they're not all Jews, I should say. So it's a massive percentage of the Jewish slash Israeli or volunteer world to be part of this. It's the largest ever in history. So there's a lot of variety within that number.
They were saying that the mobilization effort, per the percentage of population, was even greater than America had sent to Europe during all 6 of the years of World War II,
Wow.
as a percentage,
Wow.
which is insane.
Totally.
But right now, do you, because I don't know, I read reports, I don't know if they're verified or not, that Israel is pulling out a lot of the reservists from Gaza because now they're on their fourth step of the war, right? Like I think there's still obviously fighting to be done in in and around Rafah, but now they're moving a lot of the units to the north of Israel to deal with Hezbollah. Is that true? Not true?
That's what I've heard as well. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And
So,
obviously the university that whose fundraising I run in the US, University of Haifa, being in the north, there's so much news obviously around what's going on in Gaza and obviously the effects on the South during and post October 7th. I think not as many people are aware of what's going on in the North and the dangers and risks and terrorism that's happening in the North. How many people have been evacuated from their homes in the North?
100,000 people have been evacuated, 150,000, right? Like for not even like for months, for they're saying close to a year, they're not going to be able to go to their homes.
I mean, it's just crazy. Like, that's why I keep saying, like, not a single person in Israel has not been affected. It's just impossible. Even people in the center of the country are having rockets
Or a
sent.
lot, right? The Houthis were sending rockets over there. Uh, and plus like a lot of the evacuees, obviously
Yeah.
were
We had a
just
lot, we housed a lot of evacuees at the university. Like all universities in Israel had to be shut down since October 7th, obviously, with so many of their students and faculty being affected, a lot of them obviously in the reserves as well. So the university presidents and administration started communicating with each other very regularly to sort of coordinate efforts. And they all shut down from October 7th to December 31st. So our university did house people, who were evacuated from various parts of the country, and that was one small thing that we were happy to do for Israelis who needed help.
well, it's a major thing too. So I mean, my personal October 7th thing was a little different. So I was in Israel a week before for Sukkot.
Hmm.
I'd never been to Israel for Sukkot, thought to, why not, check it out. And I had the best week of my life. I hung out with four very different guy friends from, various Jewish backgrounds, diaspora communities, met some of them who were Facebook friends, like we met for the first time. And it was just so peaceful in Israel. I'm sure you've been to Israel for Sukkot. I've never, and just the whole country. And I went, like, of course, this was uh, right after, not right after, like the protests that you mentioned were going on for a while. I didn't see one protest. I didn't see one little noise. Like everything was just so, like, again, I repeat this word, peaceful, like around me. Um, everyone was just so happy to be a Jew living in Israel, to celebrate this joyous holiday of Sukkot. I felt so safe. And I don't know if you follow some of my posts before October 7th, but I was lamenting, and we can get into this a little bit later, or even like on another portion of a podcast or an Instagram live at some point. But I had traveled the Arab world in 2022. I've been to Egypt, Jordan, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and I went back to the UAE. And I noticed, I said, wow, like these countries are really, really safe, right? Like there's military checkpoints, like real military checkpoints, like they haul you out of the bus that you're on. They pat you down. Like if you're line for females, line for males, your bags are emptied out. There's snipers everywhere. Like in Egypt, like in one area, in one city area, we had to pass through 10 checkpoints in one day from morning to night, like
Wow.
5 in, 5 out. And so like in Israel, like I've always felt safe. Okay, I'll say that. But in certain areas you're kind of like a little bit like looking around, even though like you see like, IDF soldiers, but just the amount of terrorist attacks. Like every time I've been to Israel the past, I'd say like 4 years or a couple of years, there has been multiple terrorist attacks. So, like, you grab a little caution, and you know that Israel is doing the best it can, but you cannot compare the level of safety. I'm just being honest to, for example, Egypt, right? So that's something that I know like Israel dropped the ball on in terms of what it allowed, from Gaza versus what Egypt allowed in from Gaza, even though it's again mostly their population that's been radicalized. So I was just like, wow, like I feel so safe here this week. And there was not one terrorist attack. And that's something that I was not like focused on. I was like, oh, like wow, like things are so quiet here. So I remember thinking, I'm having such a good time. I would love to stay maybe for Simchat Torah. So I texted my mom and I said, hey, like I'm kind of thinking maybe to stay for a couple days. And she's like, no, like I think you should like watch your budget a little bit more. And because I was staying in a hotel or at hotels. So she's like, no, I think you've been there enough. Like it's been a week. Like, yeah, but it's Israel. Like is a week really enough? Like I want to stay like 2 weeks. Like, like I work for myself. I can, travel as much as I financially can. So she's like, no, I really think you should come home. I was like, yeah, we'll see. Okay. So ultimately, because of my friend's schedule, like they couldn't hang out, like they were a bit, or I thought they were going to be busy, right? Like after October 6th, I decided to go home. So I left October 6th. My plane was full of exuberant Jews who had just been to Israel for Sukkot. We couldn't be happier. I feel like as a people, like again, like not one protest, like nothing you see on the news or see on videos, like nothing was there that week. And so I go to sleep, I'm jet lagged. I wake up in the morning, or I was woken up in the morning. It was 6:30 our time. My sister's texting me. She never texts me. She has a baby. Like I usually have to text her, like, hey, like, can I come over to see the baby? So she's like, hey, did you see what's going on in Israel? I'm like, and I was in my sleeping stupor. I'm like, what do you mean? I was just there. Everything's fine. She's like, no, turn on the news. I'm like, Ellie, like, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. I'm like, she's like, no, turn on the news. So I turn on the news and I see the slaughter that's going on in the South. And first it says like 15 people were murdered. And I'm shocked because like, like when we have gone through terrorist attacks of recent times, like it was a lot that 4 Jews were murdered. Of course, like, okay, well, let me preface by saying even one Jew murdered is one too many, number one. But it's never been higher than four. Like I'm again, like in the past couple of years, like I've been paying it like that I'm like used to. So it was like, oh my God, there's 15. Like this is insane. And then it was 22. And now I'm like outraged, like, oh my God, 20, like what is going on down there? And then it was 50, and then it was 100. And then like by 200, I'm like crying and I'm angry and I'm just like texting, like I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And then the number is like, I remember just it's like you can't watch, but you can't not watch. And so like I remember turning on the like I would turn off the news because I couldn't handle it, but then I would turn it on like in 2 hours, like what's it at now, because at that point I realized that now it's like a real genocide, it's a massacre after 200 Jews were murdered. And then I was just I was numb. like I couldn't like you. I give you a lot of credit because like you were seeking out like companionship and going to other Jews. Like I was home alone and I could talk to other Jews, but like I couldn't even get out to a vigil that was happening on Fifth Avenue. I was just so shocked. Is like my only uh
Yeah. I would say
response.
I sort of vacillated between like wanting or needing just companionship and people around me to like wake myself up to reality a little bit and not be alone in my crazy
Yeah.
mind at the time. And then at other times, I was like, I can't be around anyone, just glued to the news or glued to social media, glued to my phone or computer. So it really went back and forth for a while. And from talking to people, not wanting to talk to people, just every emotion you said and more.
Like there were
Just
emotions.
feeling like I couldn't function like as my normal self. I'm usually a very, outgoing
Yeah,
social.
we get together, right? It's like we're both like, we can get ourselves together, like even
Yeah.
friendships. There
And I
were
remember, I remember one person said to me, I won't name who, one person said to me, Naomi, you can't wallow in fear and grief and sadness and pain and hurt. That's what they want. They're doing this so that you will feel that way and to diminish who you are and to diminish Jews and to diminish Israelis and all that stuff. Don't let them do that. Don't let them win. And I get that. And that's a valid argument. But I'm a human being and I'm a very emotional and sensitive person. And I feel things very deeply. And I said, that's okay. And that's great if that's your reaction and you're going straight into action mode, but I'm not in action mode right now. And I get that I'm a CEO and I'm responsible for an organization and I have a job to do, just like everyone has a job to do. But when you work for an Israeli institution, whether you like it or not, things things may happen like terrorist attacks or like genocides like this that you didn't plan to experience, during your tenure necessarily. And you have to deal with them. But you also have to be a human being,
but
and
also, yeah,
allowing yourself both, both roles, both as a human person who happens to be a Jew and happens to be an Israeli, but also, yes, a CEO and a professional and a manager of an organization.
and you're bringing up such a great point because this genocide was something that's not been seen since the Holocaust in terms of scale. So, and I hate to say this because again, I'm not talking about most Jews, and I hate to use this word desensitized, but I think let's use it. Like a lot of times, like I think the Jewish community had been before October 7th desensitized to terrorist attacks. Like I remember being on a trip to Israel, there was a terrorist attacks in Judea and Samaria. I'm not going to mention the name of the organization, but a lot of the group members, this was 2022, they were like, okay, it's Judea and Samaria, as if like it's allowed to happen in Judea and Samaria because it's like over the anti-Semitic green line. But it affected me. I was like, oh my gosh, like, are they okay? Like, how many survivors, blah, blah, blah. And the trip leader was annoyed at me because I kept like asking her questions. Just like, it's Israel, as if like this is like allowed to like happen. Any other country, there would be a terrorist attack, it would like, it would be emotional, right? But this scale. So I think that anyone who was telling us, and I was being told that too, it made me angry in a way. Like I don't know about you, like I'll ask you, but for me, like I ended up being like angry at Jews who were so calm, cool, and collected. I was like, are you not angry at what happened? Like, how come like you're not like full of emotion? And they're like, being calm is I'm like, how can you be calm? Like we just had because at the time too, not that there was a difference between 1200 and 1400, but remember for a long time the number was 1400. It was like 1400 Israelis and people like were massacred. How are you calm about this? So I think that also played into a lot. And you're right, like I'm not comparing myself because I'm the CEO of a small company, growing but small. You are a visible, head of a sector of a university. But my audience still expected me to share ongoing information. And the information I was sharing at the time obviously is all awful. There was nothing positive that was going on except for obviously the volunteering effort, the mobilization effort from people who even weren't being called up. And so just like fighting through the tears, like you're sharing, this awful thing, and these terrorists are still on the loose, and now like Jerusalem is shut down, and this was like going on for a while. So just and it was just this snowball effect of like there were like a week like I didn't sleep. And I know other people who share a lot more. Like, I'll name a name for our audience. And I don't know if you know, if not, someone to follow, Bruria Efune. Do you know who she is?
I don't think
On
so.
Facebook. I'll send you her Facebook picture so you can follow her. She is a Rebbetzin. I don't know how to say that properly.
Yep.
Part of Chabad, and so she and her husband have mobilized down to Eilat. They're helping daily with the displaced, from southern Israel, and they've been to Gaza. They're like helping, like you've heard obviously like some of the synagogues have been reopened, and helping helping the IDF with any faith-based needs that they've like gone in there. So what she does every single day without fail, except on Shabbat, she updates her massive audience about the war in Gaza, like, from day one through, I forgot what day we're on now, like day 140 something. And so that takes dedication. And so again, like she's like there, she's like seeing it. I was like, how are you able to like
Yeah.
handle
Yeah. I have
this?
one friend who was there on October 7th, also for the holiday, and he has family there. And he ended up also posting regularly. Now he's back in the US, and I actually just saw him last night. Um, and he goes back and forth often, but he was posting for a while every day too, because he went and volunteered. And as I'm sure a lot of people know, I mean, there were so many ramifications to this attack. It's again, it affects everything and everyone, but a lot of the farms,
Mhm.
went un sort of serviced, because farmers were killed, and the farmland was ruined and whatever. And Israelis depend on their farms,
Right. And it just so
they
happens to be most of them are in that area.
exactly. So he was one of the people who went down and volunteered, and like he started posting just short videos every day, of just what he was doing and what the produce was and why he was doing it, and showing the farmers around him and the other volunteers. And just I learned a lot about produce and vegetables and fruits that I never knew. And just like little things like that, where people went from being in corporate America or whatever they were doing to suddenly being farmers because that's what was needed. And that's true of so many people, in Israel, and so many people who have gone and volunteered. And again, some other nice, small moments that have happened since October 7th is I've also found myself connecting more with some non-Jewish friends. Of course, like many people, I've been disappointed in a lot of people who have not been supportive or not reached out at all, despite I know, looking at my Instagram stories or knowing obviously who I am and my identity, and what I do. So that's been obviously very hard and disappointing. But I've also been contacted by non-Jewish friends who I was not close to before October 7th, who have reached out proactively, or who I see watching my stories, and then asking me questions or showing support or sending me nice messages or liking my posts. My non-Jewish yoga teacher from New York, who's still there, has been messaging me, how can I go volunteer in Israel? And just really nice messages. So there's been things like that. As I mentioned, I play volleyball. I went the other day to play, and sometimes my friends who know that I'm Israeli and Jewish, sometimes they'll be like, "Oh, how's it going?"
Mm.
And I find that question really hard to answer.
It's
Since
like
October 7th, like in the beginning, I was like horrible. And then now I'm sort of, I don't know, I always pause now.
Mhm.
Before I would probably say, I'm good, I'm fine, I'm whatever. And now I find myself pausing. I'm like, how am I? It becomes this like existential question, which I think is very Jewish. But one of my friends at volleyball is not Jewish. Also, she's French, Christian. She said, "How are you?" And I remember pausing, and then she sort of paused, and she got that look of understanding. She said, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're Jewish, right?" And like we ended up having sort of a nice moment, and she gave me a hug, and she said, "I have a lot of Jewish friends, and I know France is hard," and like it was like a nice moment. So I've been having more moments like that. I've also been having, some difficult moments. There's not a lot of anti-Israel activity or sentiment that I've seen, in South Florida where I live. But it does exist. There was a protest the other day outside of the synagogue that I go to when Alan Dershowitz was speaking, and some people were being harassed, and um, that was really difficult to see. I had friends who were at that event. I also met someone who was wearing a necklace like yours. And just because I am who I am, I just walked up to her and I said, "Oh, are you Israeli?" And she says, "No, I'm Palestinian. This is a map of Palestine." And I was with a friend of mine who was Israeli also, and we both sort of paused and didn't even know what to do. Like I didn't want to start a fight and have a situation, and I just ended up walking away and saying, "Oh, agree to disagree." But so there's things like that that happen that again, maybe pre-October 7th, I wouldn't have even thought to
Like,
go up with this person. Yeah.
it's so true. Like, I mean, I'm glad that you had those positive experiences with non-Jews. Like for me, there are only, and I have non-Jewish friends in real life and many, many online. There are two who even asked, like, how are you? How's everything in Israel? One I have to call out, he's the president of the Metropolitan Republican Club, Ian Walsh Riley. So if you're going to be watching this, hi, thank you so much for the support. And I knew that the club has always been pro-Israel, but he's the only one, of my non-Jewish friends, who checked in on me for, I would say, like a month. Like, how are you? How's your family? How are your Israeli friends? Like, that was so touching, like to have that non-Jewish experience. And then, interestingly enough, so I had a lot of, like I mentioned, like a lot of Arab Zionists before October 7th. Unfortunately, a lot of them dropped off and have been silent, but some of them doubled down. And so they're the ones who actually are more vocal, I realize, and even more harsh against the Arabs in Gaza. They're the one actually, like, speaking of semantics, where did I get the term Arab occupiers? Like, I mean, I knew reality, that's the historical reality. They're the ones who've been saying that for since October 7th. They're like, why doesn't Israel kick out the Arab occupiers? They have no right to be there. They have no historical connection. That's the only way that Israel's going to achieve any semblance of peace for themselves. That's coming from an Iraqi Arab who actually has not direct ties, but one member of his family was Saddam Hussein, actually, and his immediate family had no political likeness to Saddam Hussein, and they actually had to be safeguarded to first Jordan and then to Germany, where he now lives. He's been so pro-Israel, this guy. I'm not going to mention his name. Hussein is not his last name. Another one is a Moroccan guy who lives in Belgium. And he like sends me like what the IDF is doing in Gaza, like all the military videos. Like I'm getting it from him, and he's so proud. He's like, "Go IDF, go!" And
Oh,
like I want him to go more and more and more and more. So and he was telling me that a lot of the Arab leaders, yes, like publicly, they'll be speaking anti-Israel, but he's like, I guarantee you, and I have sources. I mean, I'm not gonna reveal the sources that he shared with me. Sisi's like kind of happy that Israel's like, I mean, on one hand, he's happy that Israel's like taking care of the problem, but on the other hand, like obviously they're worried about those same terrorists coming into Egypt because Sisi did a lot to clear out the Muslim Brotherhood. He killed most of the Muslim Brotherhood members. The ones he didn't kill, he is now torturing them in real jails. I say real jails because in the Middle East, you can't have nice jails like Israel does. So, and he can't have, because you can't tell like among the Gazan population who's a terrorist and who's not. It's impossible. Like you have kids who grow up playing Stab a Jew from the time they're 3 years old. Like in kindergarten, they're brainwashed literally how to murder a Jew. Like it's part of their kindergarten graduation ceremonies. On October 7th, like no one talks about 1,000+ civilians. There's no such thing as civilians in Gaza. It's all one military base, basically. 1,000 civilians were murdering Israelis and they were helping Hamas. Or when Hamas and the 1,000+ civilians were dragging Jewish bodies into the streets of Gaza, all of Gaza was erupting in cheers. Women, children, the elderly. It was like a holiday for them. So how can and like the Arab countries see this? Like Arab
and there are
Egypt is
civilians who are holding hostages. And
exactly like how many families are doing that?
no,
So there
and I will say one other positive that's happened since October. I don't agree with one thing you said that all Gazans are terrorists. I think, and I do think people are born innocent. I think I do think that there could be potential for peace if they were not corrupted since infancy or since toddlerhood.
That's the thing, it's the propaganda. So like,
Propaganda, the education, the camps, the terrorist camp, all that stuff that And
it's a lost society because like
right, and I have Palestinian friends, like I mentioned, who, I have Palestinian friends, which is first of all a nice thing for me to have, that I can even have that. But I have friends from there who are critical, of their own government and of what's going on there. So I'll just say that. And obviously friends from elsewhere who are. I will add again, most of my non-Jewish friends have not reached out. It's the few that have stand out to me because it's, it was so nice. And, my college roommate, I mentioned Brown earlier, I would say that she was not particularly pro-Israel. I don't think she would have identified as pro-Israel pre-October 7th. We have had more conversations about Israel, about Judaism, about what's going on there. She's a professor of religious studies in California. She's very much a liberal, and she's an atheist, but she's been extremely, I guess, supportive and interested and curious. And, I wouldn't say, I don't know if I would say she's a Zionist, maybe that's too strong of a word, but she's much more, it seems like she's woken up a little bit to what's going on and to the truth of it. And being supportive in a way she never was around Israel, to me, at least. And, we don't agree on everything by any means, but we end every conversation by saying, I love you. I love you. And, I think there's more synergy than there ever was between us, at least on that front. I will also say, again, just how I felt in October. All my friends and family know how much my birthday means to me. I'm a big birthday fan and have a big party every year. I think you've been to some of my parties in New York. My birthday is October 12th. And I've always, my whole life, I've joked that all of October is my birthday and I celebrate as many times as I can. And it was sort of an issue for me this year because, 5 days after October 7th is my birthday. Normally it's like the best day of the year for me. And it was also just, it made the whole experience strange because I got so many birthday messages and calls and posts and all that. And most of them were just happy birthday. I hope you have a great day, whatever. And then people kept asking me, how's your day? What are you doing? All those questions. And I really struggled. It's maybe a small example, but I was like, should I even celebrate my birthday this year? What am I allowed to do? What's appropriate to do? It's sort of like after 9/11, like how should I be? What's the right thing to do? Am I in mourning? Am I in Shiva right now? I really struggle, like you said, like functioning normally, eating, sleeping, running an organization, whatever. And my birthday was one just example of that. Like, I think even now, months later, I still sometimes have a hard time knowing how much social media to consume, how engaged to be with what's going on there, because it really takes an emotional drain. Or when friends of mine, I have another friend I see at the gym who's Italian, not Jewish, but has a Hebrew tattoo on his arm and has been very supportive of me. He also sometimes says, how are you doing? And again, how much do I want to engage in that conversation every single time? It's exhausting. It really is.
It's like, do we want to lie or do we want to be
Exactly. I'm a very honest person, so it's a hard question for me.
No, and oh my gosh, I'm with you on the birthday. So my birthday is later than yours, but not by much, November 3rd. I was not in a celebratory mode at all. I went to dinner with my mom. I did not even want to blow out my candle. I mean, I did, but like it was a very low-key affair because on one hand, and it's a contrast. Like, I have a friend who served in the reserves. Like he was first, they were sent to Judea and Samaria, then into Gaza. And even like in his tank, like he was making a video and he was saying, like, look, like the Jews who are not serving right now, go and celebrate, go to the clubs, go on your best vacations, because we see that Jewish life is very fragile. Like you never know when your life is going to end. Like, I mean, like, unfortunately. So he was encouraging, like, look, like, he made this video in December, just a couple months later after October 7th. But like for me, like, I don't know, but I also see the backlash online. Like, there's some Jewish couples that are posting their extravagant vacations to Tulum, Mexico and to Punta Cana and all that. And there are Jews who push back. They're like, seriously? Like when we have Jews who are still in hostage crisis right now, they haven't seen the day of light, like the light of day, for over 140 days. And like, here you are, like boasting about your vacation. Is this like the right thing to do? So that's the thing. There is no right way to behave. Like everyone has to figure it out for themselves. I'm personally, I think a little bit more like you. It's like it has been over 4 months, I'm like, I hate to say this, it's like part of my new normal, right? Like kind of like after 9/11. And I also hate when people compare October 7th to 9/11. 9/11 was a game changer. Like it's such a tragedy for America, for the world actually. But in terms of scale, October 7th is above and beyond
Of course.
anything we've seen. And people don't make that connection because again, like percentage of
I think they
population.
say it's 50 times in terms of the population.
Right. And it's just staggering. So like it's like I think we're still navigating, right? It's like, okay, like if I'm about to like go to DC, I'm about to go to like a political fundraiser. Do I post about it? Do I not post?
I think every day you have to ask those questions. And, we did a family vacation to Mexico, speaking of Mexico, in December. And, I still think it's important to have fun, to enjoy yourself, to do self-care, even though I hate that cliche. I probably work out more now than I ever did because it's my way of getting out energy or anxiety or feelings, and other just things that make me feel good physically, mentally, emotionally. If I don't take care of myself, I won't be able to function and I won't be able
Exactly.
to
You won't be able
lead an
to talk.
organization. And I'd say that to my colleagues, and anyone I know, like, you shouldn't work 24 hours a day. You shouldn't be watching the news 24 hours a day. Like, I mean, maybe some people can handle that amount of intensity, but I know for me, I need balance in my life. I need positive things in my life. I do go out and I have a lot of Jewish friends here and it feels good to be around them and support each other. And I went to a friend's birthday party last night. I think most people were wearing some form of Jewish, pride around their necks. So I think, to me, those kinds of things feel good and feel real. I live near the beach. Even just being on the beach for a little bit calms me down. And, so everyone needs to find what works for them. And there's no right or wrong answer. I do hope that everyone out there, Jewish or non-Jewish, Israeli or not, is doing something, to advocate for those who have been affected, those who are still hostage. I'm disappointed, obviously, like many people, in how few organizations, celebrities, leaders of any kind have done anything at all, really, in this situation. There's many examples of people who should be doing something who are silent or even worse than silent. That's been really, really hard to digest,
Even amongst
organizations.
our own population too. Like, I mean, not to contribute to the stereotype, but the stereotype is true. Nothing to be ashamed of. Hollywood is dominated by Jews, like Jewish producers and Jewish studio heads. Obviously, like for those who don't know, that came because Jews were not allowed to work in the entertainment field. So Jews had to create their own. And so that's how Hollywood was started. Um, Nothing to be ashamed of. And so where are those Jewish stars? There's only Deborah Messing who's been saying anything, right?
And
Like,
Michael Rappaport.
oh, of course. I guess I don't see
So
him
I
as like
just saw
British
perform
Hollywood.
live in Miami and I love him. And
He's like a comedian, not like,
I know, but he is in a show that I'm watching right now.
oh, which one?
Life and Beth with Amy Schumer. Amy Schumer's also been
Yeah,
good.
sure. It's been
So
more,
it's nice to see.
but
But yeah,
yeah,
I mean, the fact that we have to name, them on one hand is not a good
it's
sign.
crazy.
I was heartened by, speaking of what you were saying, by Barbara Streisand's
Mhm.
speech. I assume you saw it, where she actually, I noticed, didn't say the word Jew or Judaism once, or Israel, but she did tell the history of Hollywood and the anti-Semitism that created Hollywood and how it's reared its ugly head again now. So I thought that was nice that she used her platform for that.
And
Um,
it's, although she needs to say Israel because she was in Israel where she sang, oh my gosh, help me. What's that really emotional song? I think you know that something she did it in the 70s and she like Shimon Peres was there, Rabin was there, like right in front of her.
Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, or is it?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So she's saying that. It just
I
like
think I thought, yeah, I saw a video of that. Yeah.
so I'm not saying like she's anti-Israel, but like for some reason, like she's just been not
I checked her social media. She did like one post and it was kind of a equivocating post. I think she posted once that she was giving money to the Federation or something. But I mean, yeah, I mean, pretty much everyone beyond a handful could be doing more.
right.
And
And I don't know.
I find it so disappointing that celebrities whose cause celeb,
Mhm.
no pun intended, is women and girls, or is refugees, or is sexual violence, or is hostage, or is terrorism, like whatever be the case, all of which is at play here, who, like we talked about earlier, have a hard time talking about it when it comes to Jews or Israel,
Or
even
when
if
you
they themselves have Jewish ancestry.
Or when you see celebrities that are blowing up, I mean, like, well, Taylor Swift was always big, but like now she's, like with who she's dating and everything. The fact that she and Selena Gomez went to a Gaza fundraiser and we still have she still has Jewish fans. And I don't know if you saw the clip, but it was at the Grammys. So an Israeli reporter came up to her and said, like, oh, like, could you mention the Israeli hostages? And Taylor Swift rebuked her. Like she couldn't even say the
I saw
hostages.
that. I saw
Yeah,
that.
that was crazy. It's like now, like I never like disliked Taylor Swift. I never like, I mean, I'm not in that age category, but I didn't mind her. But like now, every time I see her and she's everywhere, I just say like, oh my gosh, like such a terrorist supporter. And
And I read somewhere that her bodyguard, who apparently she's very close to, is Israeli and went back to serve right now in the reserves, and she couldn't
that
even.
still didn't connect with her because like her very liberal friend who's dating a liberal Jewish guy friend, Benny Blanco, who's a music producer, like they don't speak up. So again, like what I focus.
I also find it very strange that Barbara Streisand, when she got her award, was introduced by Jennifer Aniston, who's fine, and Bradley Cooper, who's dating one of the Hadid
Right.
sisters, which I also thought was kind of ironic. But
And I love how the Hadids again think that they're Palestinians, but someone did a very in-depth ancestry on them, and it turns out that the Hadids ended up in the region of Palestine as tax collectors under the Ottomans. Like a lot of Arabs came in, and they actually were fabulously wealthy off of the backs of Jews because they were collecting actually the taxes from Jews, not the taxes from Arabs. So that's what I tell also like in my or explain in my classes. Like you can tell where an Arab is from anywhere in Israel, which includes Gaza and Judea and Samaria, by their last name. It's very easy. Like the name says it all, and none are actually from Israel. One quick note about your friend who erroneously says that he's Palestinian. The reason he's able to be critical is two things. So Mossab Youssef, who's literally the son of Hamas, as you know, he said, where was the moral clarity from the people in Gaza? Because you have the Iranians who are dealing with a far more extreme regime. They had the moral clarity, have the moral clarity to stand up and protest. So when there are lies that say that Gaza is an open air prison, 250,000 Gazans left Gaza in the past 12 years. So outside of Gaza, sure, like they can be critical, but I'm talking about inside Gaza. Those are the ones who are a lost society, right? Like from the time that you are a small child to the time that you are an older adult, they grew up and died of Jew hatred, right? So it's like, yeah, like you could have people who maybe don't hate you as much, but all of them grew up like gleefully wanting to murder you as a Jew. So it just like the right opportunity, like I think like, some societies can change. Like we saw with Nazi Germany, right? Like only 6% of the population voted for Hitler, but that was a country, right? So, the country surrendered. They didn't have other countries propping them up post Nazism. And with Gaza, it's so different, right? Because, like, if Israel were to leave Gaza ever, and I hope it never does, but if it doesn't retake our own land, what's going to happen? Qatar is going to refund them. The Saudis are going to refund them. Turkey is one of their biggest donors. The EU is going to refund them. The liberals in America are going to refund them. Like, I call him Jihad Joe. He refunded all of the terrorist groups. So it's this perpetual cycle of murdering Jews as a business, and the business is very lucrative. So it's never going to exit their society because it's not a country and it's a very different circumstance than after post World War II. So that's why this is something like no country in the world has ever dealt with before, right? Like you're dealing with not only one terrorist organization plus Islamic Jihad, which no one talks about for some reason, who are actually more popular than Hamas, but also all of that support that's pouring in to upkeep the murdering of Jews. And that's what they're all used to. It's like, again, like, if this was just under Hamas, fine. Like this is 20 years, we can untangle this brainwashing. This has been going on there since 1936. And it's been going on in Judea and Samaria even more, even further back. It's been going on in Israel for over 100 years. That's like, when people say like, oh, it's a conflict, it's a conflict. Like, no, no, no. Conflict means like both sides of equal moral fortitude arguing over a legitimate claim to a land. Like here, it's I call it the war on Jews, right? Like we have terrorism statistics in Israel going all the way back to 1860, official ones. What about all the non-official ones going back probably even more? So I mean, at least like the Arabs. And so this is what I would love to talk to you about. So I saw a statistic, you can tell me if it's right or wrong, that prior to October 7th, something like 44% of Arab Israelis were pro-Israel or consider themselves pro-Israel. Now, uh, the number seems really high, so you can tell me yes or no. Now it's like over 70%. They just, again, like what I have been reading and like seeing, because they realized that, Arabs were also murdered on October 7th. It wasn't just Jews.
And
And
kidnapped.
so, mhm. And just so our audience knows, like they just considered everyone to Israel to be Jews. And, like if you live in Israel, like you're the enemy.
And I think there was actually recordings that I saw or heard where people were saying, "Don't shoot me, I'm Muslim. Don't shoot me, I'm Arab." Whatever. I saw evidence of that, and they were, it didn't matter if you live in Israel, you're the enemy.
Exactly. Actually, there was a hero, there was a Muslim hero who was on,
Yeah,
do you hear that story with the army base? And he took off his uniform only to be in his white shirt. And just so our audience knows, and he was yelling in Arabic to the terrorists to try
yeah.
to decoy them. And that's how he was able to save a lot of his Jewish, soldiers.
Mhm.
But then they unfortunately killed him at the end. But he was so brave, like to even think to do that. Like
Yeah. I mean, the number of brave people that really showed their true colors
it's a
from all
mile.
backgrounds, and I have to mention Druze, again, given where the university is in Haifa, we have a lot of Druze students and faculty, and they're extremely pro-Israel, and they serve in the IDF in huge numbers, and they're maybe even more pro-Israel now too, like you said.
So can
But
you,
they really are adamantly, yes, they're Arabs, but they are adamantly Israelis.
and they're not Muslim though. That's what they get really upset when someone says that
Right.
they're like we're not. But could you? This is what I've been fascinated by in terms of your role, because like you said, like University of Haifa. Many people know Haifa to be very mixed city, right? Arab and Jew. What's it been like? Like from October 7th to now in terms of the Arab student population at the university?
I'll answer that. One thing that you triggered in me that I just want to mention that I thought of was the only other positive thing that I just want to say that's happened since October 7th, beyond the unity and the bravery and the volunteerism and all that, has been the exposure, I would say, of our, I would say enemies, maybe enemies is the right word, in UNRWA or in other organizations that have been fomenting and harboring terrorists or anti-Israel activity, where my friend Hillel Neuer, who I've known for many years, for instance, who runs UN Watch, has been submitting this evidence for a long time, been ignored. Now, post October 7th, finally they're willing to listen to him and do something about it. So there are situations where finally people are waking up. They're waking up to the anti-Semitism on college campuses. Before October 7th, I don't know if they would be having these hearings. I don't know if presidents of universities would be stepping down. So I just want to say that there's been more attention and interest and willingness to do something about the anti-Israel and terrorist bodies, among us that were previously considered good or positive, and now are really, people are realizing are not. So to answer your question, yes, University of Haifa, just like Haifa itself, is a very mixed university. It's by far the most diverse university in Israel. The diversity is about double that of Hebrew U, Tel Aviv U, and other universities in terms of the non-Jewish population there.
So Naomi, I just want to interject just for our audience and myself. What's the percentage of Arab students?
About 40%, 40 to 45%.
It's
It's
significant.
huge. It's almost half the population. At the other big universities like Hebrew U, Tel Aviv, I believe it's around 20, 25%. So that's massive. And I'm actually writing an article right now about University of Haifa post October 7th, because your audience may or may not have read articles since then, and there was an NPR piece as well. There was a New York Times piece talking about University of Haifa and trying to find the conflict or find the drama, always finding the negative instead of the positive of what's going on. And saying, oh, it's difficult right now on campus. And there was a few students who posted some negative comments on social media, and there's been a couple temporary suspensions, et cetera. University of Haifa has a student population of almost 18,000 students. The fact that a university of that size, in a country and a city that are very mixed, post the worst genocide since the Holocaust, has not had worse conflict, has not had skirmishes on campus, has gone back to in-person classes, has not resorted to Zoom or canceling the rest of the year. To me, I find that to be a testament to everything the university is doing right. And it could be so much worse. I mean, other universities in Israel, of course, they have diverse populations, but not nearly, like I said, to the extent that we do. So they have it almost, an easier job, I would say, at, having peace and tolerance and coexistence, on their campuses. We worked very hard. I shouldn't say we, it's really my colleagues in Israel, worked very hard for months before reopening on December 31st to try to find the right way to reopen. There was a lot of questions that were asked. There was a Jerusalem Post article that came out this week that everyone should read that talks about all the steps we took to make sure we opened in the right way. Holding focus groups, holding workshops, holding Zoom conversations. When is it appropriate to reopen? What if there's still students in the reserves? How do we handle those members of the population who have lost family members, who have had people abducted, who are going through psychological and emotional trauma, which is obviously very prevalent? How do we increase the amount of emotional and psychological support we're offering to the body? How do we deal with if there's questions or comments that come up in class? How do we deal with the fact that a lot of the Jewish students will be holding rifles because they're in the reserves and that's mandatory, and Arab students may feel, threatened or may feel fearful, or vice versa. The Jewish students may feel fearful because they don't know what their classmates, are thinking or posting. So there's tons of questions that have come up. There's a lot of things I could list that we've done to address it. Again, I recommend reading that article because it really does a good job. Ironically, right before the October 7th attack, or coincidentally, I guess, we did start a new division on campus to address the diversity and to make it an even more positive place to be for our student population. They did consider calling it DEI, but they chose not to, given the fact that it was a negative term even before October 7th and even potentially more so now. So it's a play on DEI, but it's not DEI. We have two wonderful women who are running that division. One is a Jewish woman, one is an Arab Muslim woman. They work really well together, and we've been building that division together with them in the United States. And they handed out bracelets on the first day back in class that are orange, a sort of neutral color. That's a positive message of, again, coming back to study together. Really, not making it about politics, not making it about division, but really just making it about we're all Israelis and we're all here to learn, to study, to work, volunteer, and be together. And everything that I'm hearing, I haven't been back to Israel since October 7th, but I'll be there soon. Everything that I'm hearing on the ground has been positive. Of course, there's occasional difficult situations that might come up, but again, I think it's been remarkably quiet and positive. Like you said, I think the pro-Israel sentiment among everyone in Israel has just skyrocketed. And I think most people are on the same page when it comes to, we want to live here, we want to study together, we're here to get an education, we're not here to have protests and rallies. And I was sort of half joking to someone the other day. They asked me, maybe all these people who are not interested in giving to the anti-Semitic universities in America right now, maybe they should send their money to you. And I said, that's a really good idea.
That's actually excellent, because I would like to start, because I suspended my donations to both AU and Columbia years ago, and I have not donated to Israeli universities, not because I don't want to, it just wasn't on, like I have Jewish organizations here. So I think a lot of American Jews are like, oh yeah, like we donate, but that's a great point, and I will start.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. If you'd like to donate, go to our website, asuh.org/donate. I really, not because I work there. I mean,
Right.
I would be a fan no matter what. Again, I'm a daughter. I like to say I'm a daughter of Haifa, given that my parents both grew up there and I have so much family there. But I think it's a model of what Israel can be and should be, you know? I think the fact that we're doing it right, despite all the tragedy and conflict and horror that we've been experiencing, the fact that we can get it right, and yet American universities that have billions of dollars and tons of people working on diversity and all these things in place, the fact that they're getting it so wrong, to me is very confounding. And I would rather my money and my efforts go towards those who are doing it right.
That's an excellent point. So I have two things that I was thinking about while you were talking. Number one is how do I say this properly? All of the problematic issues in American universities, right, that are going on. Do you see how the University of Haifa model could that somehow be not explicably applied, not fully, but elements of what the university did right? Could some of those elements be applicable to American universities?
100%. And I will, speaking of Ivy League universities that are doing things right or wrong, I will say kudos to Dartmouth, because I will say that's the one university that you don't really hear in the news. Interestingly, I've never, since
I
October,
forgot. I actually forgot about Dartmouth.
I know people forget about Dartmouth, and I never applied there, or I've been to New Hampshire many times, but I didn't apply there. But I will say that from what I'm hearing from friends of mine who went there or who are associated with Dartmouth, they are one of the few universities that are handling it somewhat well, or okay at least. And I heard that the reason they haven't had a lot of protests or difficult anti-Semitism on campus is because they have a long-standing partnership of two professors. This is what I'm hearing, is one Jewish and one Arab Muslim, who work really well together and do a lot of programs and lectures and events together, and are very publicly a partnership on campus. And it's not us versus them, and it's not he said, she said. They do that. And I think, and we're not copying them by any means, but the women that I mentioned, Yael and Irene, are a Jewish woman and a Muslim Arab woman who do everything in partnership with this division that I mentioned. And there's a lot of other examples of Jewish and Arab people working together on campus in similar ways. There's a lot of efforts that we have on campus for people from different backgrounds to go into the community of Haifa and volunteer together to do study projects together. We have free Arabic classes that we offer. There's a lot of things, we have Hebrew classes that we offer. There's a lot of things that we're doing to, I guess, normalize, all the different segments of the population, instead of having us versus them and segregate them and saying, this is the Jewish dorm, that's the Muslim dorm, and this is, we love Israel Week and we hate Israel Week and all that kind of stuff. Like, no,
Like we
let's
are Israel.
yeah,
And
let's talk together, let's work together, study and live and everything. That we don't have a Muslim dorm and a Jewish dorm, like all those different things. Let's integrate and make it one cohesive university. Of course, yes, it's easier for the Jewish students to speak Hebrew to each other. It's easier for the Muslim students to speak, Arabic to each other. The Jewish students are a few years older because they served in the IDF. There's difference, the Muslim students often come from similar towns and villages. So a lot of them live at home because they come from more traditional backgrounds. We do have a campus, by the way, in Bnei Brak for Orthodox students. So there's obviously some segregation just due to natural, cultural, and language and age differences. But again, I think we're doing the very best we can given the circumstances. I keep saying it was hard enough pre-October 7th. It's, a million times harder now post. But we all were anxious to see what would happen on December 31st when we reopened. And now it's, what is it, March 1st. So far, so good. I think if we can survive this and thrive, we can survive anything. And I'll also say that as far as I know, the numbers have not gone down. People did not unenroll, people did not drop out. On the contrary, people are coming back to campus sort of more energized.
Well, kol hakavod to you and your team. So one statement I want to make, and then one suggestion if you guys are not thinking already. So one statement is before October 7th, and not that it changed my mind completely. I'm just more cautious now. So after Abraham Accords, I don't know if you were following my post. I was like super pro Arab. Like Arabs, like I saw this hope, like this hope of peace, right? And having traveled through the Arab world was so eye-opening. Like I honestly think like all Jews who can should, because you do see like you see a different culture. I realized to myself that before the invention of Islam, Arabs and Jews got along great. You know, like how many Jews, like, you know, the history of the Jewish people. There were so many Jews living in the Hejaz, region of Saudi Arabia that it actually was a protectorate of the Kingdom of Judea. Like there was trading partners and everything. And so it wasn't until Islam that Arabs suddenly had a problem with Jews. And not all Arabs, just depending on the country and varying degrees. So it's going to take that reformation within Islam itself. Like it's happening a little bit. I feel like, Christianity, it took them 2000 years to reform themselves. Like people don't understand that, what was the Holocaust? That was 2000 years. That was a culmination of 2000 years of Christian anti-Semitism. Whether Hitler was going to do it or someone else, it was bound to happen just because of, the brewing hatred on the continent of Europe against Jews. It took obviously World War One and how that ended, plus hundreds of other factors. That was something that was there, right? And finally, Christianity reformed itself. So we're no longer fearful of Christians murdering Jews and massacring us. Unfortunately, I don't see Islam reforming in our lifetime to the full extent, but maybe if some of the Abraham Accord countries are going to see the light. Who knows, maybe like 10, 15 years from now, like already like Saudi Arabia, like yes, on one hand, they're, trying to push an anti-Semitic two-state solution in order to have peace with Israel. On the other hand, they just arrested a woman in Mecca. Did you see that video? She was waving the flag of terrorism. Within 2 seconds, she was arrested.
Oh, I didn't see.
Um, yeah, it was great. I'll share it with you offline. They did help shoot down Houthi missiles that were bound for Eilat. They didn't have to do that. They don't have a peace treaty. So, like the UAE, like, yeah, they're not like vocally supporting Israel, but the best that we can ask of them is that they just shut up and not make it worse, right? They still had like grand Hanukkah celebrations for the
Yeah,
Jews.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So things like that, plus like, this is like the very nascency of any effort. Like, who knows, 10, 15, 20 years from now, maybe, and it's going to take Iran. Like, like the population, most of the population wants their terrorist regime gone. Who knows? Maybe we're going to be like vacationing in Tehran.
Mhm.
It's funny. It's
I heard that there are Jewish tours to Iran, which I'm a little hesitant
there are.
to
Wow. Okay.
join, but I'll send you that too.
Yeah. So I'll wait till there's a peace treaty.
Right.
But so it's like, you look back in history, the Iranians, right? They were the Persians were best friends with Jews for how many, like centuries. Arabs, again, like it just that we genetically are very much tied to Arabs. Like how many, like some Jews like forget, like we literally were part of the same haplogroups. Then when our nation formed and we started marrying within each other, our haplogroups split. But it's so crazy. Now I went to Saudi Arabia, not like I felt like I was in Israel at all. I don't want people to think like I'm suddenly, like equating the two. There was a familiarity in Saudi Arabia that I like didn't feel in other countries except for Israel. Like
Hmm.
you just feel like a lot of these people are like your people. And that makes sense because a lot of Jews stayed behind who were not expelled and they just assimilated into the population.
Interesting.
So again, like it didn't feel like home, but it felt like this country feels too familiar. That like I don't feel the same in like France and like, Mexico or any other country. So again, like there's this ties. Like when, you talk about, the Arabs and Jews and like, the Arabs are not rioting at your campus. I'm just and like, my thought was like, because they shouldn't, because take away all the craziness and all the propaganda, we should be the best of friends.
Of course.
Culturally, we're so similar.
Yeah.
Like we have more in common with Arabs culturally than we do with anyone from Europe. like absolutely. Like our families, like a lot of even a lot of Islam, it was based on Judaic practices, right? Like the five pillars of Islam is just like
Mhm.
versions of the Jewish faith, right? Like the practice of tzedakah, is there. Uh, Praying 5 times a day, like Jews used to, like all of that. So I had another thought. Do you think that the University of Haifa would have a program where they send Arab students as speaking ambassadors
Hmm.
to problematic colleges in
Hmm.
America? You
That's a good
know,
idea.
who will like
Yeah.
explain that, there's no apartheid, there's no occupation. This is my real life. Like have videos of like their everyday life where they're interacting with their Jewish professors and not being relegated to the back of the class. Just things like that.
No, that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
I'll look into that. That's a good
Yeah.
idea.
Just
Mhm.
and again, like, this is just like top of line
Yeah, yeah.
thought.
Yeah. No, I think those are the kinds of speakers that are necessary. And I've seen some videos here and there of Arab Israelis speaking out and in favor of Israel and explaining,
And they're
the truth,
powerful.
just like having Ethiopian Israelis saying, yes, Israel is diverse and not a white country. So I think
Just
that's
so
enough.
laughable. Like as
Yeah.
if like Jews are like first of all, like I hate like I now teach a class. It actually just ended yesterday. And oh my gosh, like people are like, oh, but like Jews are white. I'm like, no, no, no. First of all, skin tone is not race, number one. And Jews have never been racially white, are not racially white, and never will be racially white. So that's something like even we as a people have to just
Yeah.
disassociate from.
Yeah.
And then like anyone who's been to Israel and those who have not go to Israel, like I've never seen diversity like there. And then like also too, I mean, maybe it's different. Those who grew up there, I go there, I cannot tell who's Arab, who's a Jew,
Yeah. Yeah.
only based on their head covering. I'm like, oh, okay, so that's a kippah, that's a
Right.
Jewish,
Right.
but like otherwise, like you can't tell. And like, a lot of the Jews are darker skinned than the Arabs.
I think it's the majority Mizrahi, I thought, in Israel.
Yeah, like Sephardic, yeah, it's 61% Sephardic and
Yeah.
Mizrahi
Yeah.
combined.
Yeah.
So, and even Ashkenaz, like I just did a DNA test a couple years ago. I did 3 of them just to make sure. So I'm 92% Ashkenaz. And fun fact, it was 20,000 Italian Sephardic Jews who
Hmm.
first went into the Ashkenaz region. So everyone who's Ashkenaz come from that Sephardic stock. And then
Hmm.
of course, over time, like we all married each other. So like yeah, 92% Ashkenaz, 8% Sephardic. Then it broke it down even more. 6% Iberian makes sense, right? The migration patterns. 2% Italian Jew. So yeah, like we're all like
Interesting.
this. And in
Yeah.
my family, I have very olive toned skinned people. My
Mhm.
sister, my late grandfather, most of his family that were unfortunately murdered, during the Holocaust. But I saw pictures. My mom, when she was a child, was like super, super, like tan, like your color base. So it saddens me when they're like, oh yeah, like Jews are from Europe and we're white. I'm like,
No,
no.
no, not so much. Not so much.
Yeah, or you've seen videos from Gaza, and some of those children are like white as snow and have like red hair. So again, it just shows that like no skin tone, eye color, hair color, that does not mean
Yeah.
race. It's like your actual indigeneity, right? Like our indigenous nature is from Israel. So what was my point here? Oh, so Arabs. So I love, well, first of all, I think genetically he could be a Jew because he's Bedouin. But Muhammad Kabia, for those who don't know him, please follow him. He does a better job than almost any Jew in terms of explaining the truth about Israel. Another one, Yosef Haddad. Just, how do you pronounce his name properly?
Yeah, that's correct. He's coming to Miami in April, actually.
Okay, I would love to be there if
Mhm.
invited. Is it open to anyone or is it
Yeah.
closed?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
he's one of my heroes.
No, he's amazing. And he's, I think, engaged to a Jewish woman. I
Yeah, and he's what, like he's Arab Christian, right? Like he's an Arab
think
Christian.
so. I think so,
He
yeah.
served in the IDF as a commander, not just like, I mean, not just, I mean, it's honorable to serve in the IDF, but he was top. And he was saying, he's like, yeah, I had all these Jews, who were reporting to me, and I never had problems because they all knew that I'm on their side. So it's so important to have those Arab voices because when we send Jews to talk about Israel, that's like personally I prefer to speak to other Jews, right? So like when I
Yeah,
speak, it's about let's make sure that our facts are correct and our history is tight before we, talk about it to other people, before we post things, before, we write op-eds.
right.
But when we go into the non-Jewish communities, it so helps to
Yeah,
have an Arab voice.
100%. Yeah.
Absolutely. So
I think
some
an
people,
Arab voice and a non-white presenting, kind of, if that
or,
even
or, or, to, or to explain that, like, hey, like I'm not racially white. Like that's
100%.
always
And by the way, I did a DNA test a while ago. I only did one, but I did 23andMe. I want to do Ancestry, which I keep forgetting to do it. A lot of our family has done them as well. I'm 99.7% Ashkenazi,
which means
despite,
that you're Sephardic roots also because of
yeah. I mean, I
the
think I look Sephardic, but who knows? But also in my family, there's a range from my tone of skin to like your tone of skin, and it's
everyone, yeah. Like again, like I have met Arabs who are like lighter than I am. Well, okay,
yeah.
this is my winter. Well, so I also have a ring light. Like I'm a little bit darker than this.
This is my Miami, color. Yeah.
So jealous. But yeah, it's like I think it's just like about, establishing the reality on the ground and like, as many videos as we can get out there, as many
And
speakers.
people going there. I mean, you saw Tiffany Haddish speaking, who's an amazing woman from everything I've seen.
And
Again,
who's half a Jew too. Yeah.
yeah. And she went there herself. And I really encourage anyone who's watching, listening to go
Mhm.
yourself if you can. There's plenty of ways to go there. Go volunteer if you can, even better. But I think there's nothing like, I mean, I've traveled a good amount as well. I've been in the Middle East. I've only been to a few countries beyond Israel. I'd like to do more. But it is eye-opening to go. But I think anyone who's never been to Israel, I mean, the second you get off the plane, you'll just be in awe and you'll learn so much. And it's just, there's nothing like being there.
And also it's so beautiful too. Like what people like don't understand. It's like again, like I have
So
extensively
beautiful.
traveled in the Middle East. There are parts of Egypt that are pretty. There are parts of Saudi Arabia that are pretty. But Israel, like the whole country, it's just stunning. So like forget about just like going and like, seeing for yourself. Like if you just want to experience a beautiful country with like amazing food and hospitality and the people, there's nothing like Israel.
And I will, another plug for Haifa. I mean, I've been all over Israel many times. I think Haifa is beyond gorgeous. I mean, if you stop at the top of University of Haifa, which is the tallest part of Haifa, and you just look out, you just see vast open space, you see mountains and hills, you see the ocean, you see city, you see everything you can see to other countries nearby. It's just, I don't know, it's the beauty of it. Every time I'm there, I'm just kind of shocked. And there's
That's
a
what
cable car now that they have. I don't know if you've
yeah.
seen that
Yeah.
from the port downtown to the top of the university. It goes about 20 minutes. And I took that. And again, like as you're going up and down the mountains, just the views there are just so cool.
Next time I go to Israel, I want to spend more time in Haifa because I've been there
Oh,
on tours, but they only do like a day trip for some reason. I'm like, no, 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 I want like 2, 3 days. I
you
want to
need
more.
to. You need to. It's such a short trip from the center of the country, and it's so different.
Yeah. So I think I make it look like I love Tel Aviv, but and Jerusalem is my favorite city in the world, but like Haifa deserves
Thank
more.
you. Third biggest city in Israel.
There we go. And it's true. Like I love like also seeing the diversity, right? Like what people don't understand, like, they'll say like, oh, like Israel's like a Jewish. First of all, I hate when people say state. Like Israel's a country. That's a whole separate conversation. But they'll say like, oh, like it's just for Jews. I'm like, okay, so Jews are indigenous to Israel. Yes, Jews are the majority of Israel, but it's not a Jewish country. There's so many other groups there. Like
Mhm.
the Circassians and the Druze and the Arameans and the Muslim Arabs, which, like they do contribute to society. Like 40% of them work in the healthcare field, So like I also like, obviously after October 7th, there are people who understandably angry, like, oh, kick out all like the Arabs out of Israel. Like, okay, so who's gonna be like the nurses and the doctors, right? So it's like, like it's a fabric that does work. And
Yeah, and at our university too, a lot of the Arab students are in the healthcare field. That's what they're studying. And they're
right.
coming, we need that in the North. We need doctors and nurses. It's vital.
Yeah, or like there's this one guy that I was friends with. He was hurt in Gaza war. Oh my gosh, I'm losing track like how many wars there were. 2020, no, I'm sorry, 2014. And so he was badly injured, and it was an Arab nurse who saved his life. And he's forever indebted to her. So
Wow.
that's the thing. Like people need to like really like understand. It's like it's not an us versus them within Israel. But in order to have no more genocides, it will need to be an us versus them in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, because that's the thing. Like the Judea and Samaria majority support Hamas, and the reason Abbas has not had an election in 17 years. Yes, he's a dictator. Yes, he loves the money and the power, but he also knows that he would lose power in a second because his Arab population would vote for Hamas. So just it's like the balancing, like everything I think about Israel, it's like the balancing reality, right? It's like we have harmonious populations, we have very acrimonious populations and like other sides of the country. And the Israeli leaders hopefully will no longer kowtow to the West and realize that Israel is the Middle East, right? Like, so when Jews say, like, oh, like Israel's a democracy and this and that, it's not really something for, I'm just being honest, like my own opinion, to me, it's not something to be like proud of, because safety has to come first, right? So like when, the West, is against Arab countries and how they keep their population safe, it's not our way of keeping our population safe, but we also have a very different reality. Like we have oceans that separate. We have a fairly friendly neighbor up north, not a murderous neighbor down south, right? Like as much problems we have as Mexico, they're not storming. Mexican nationals are not like storming and like murdering the citizens of Texas, right? I mean, yes, we're having problems with illegal immigrants, but those are not Mexican nationals who are coming in. So it's very different problems, very micro regional issues. And so as long as Israeli leaders put the Israeli safety public first, I think we're going to crawl out of what led up to October 7th in terms of even not allowing, or like why this even was able to occur,
And
you
I
know?
think that's one of the reason why 9/11 is in many ways not the same, because the people who murdered Americans on 9/11 were not our neighbors. They were very far away and were not an imminent threat the way that those who perpetrated October 7th,
And
were.
we flew and we sent ships thousands of miles away to go take care of them.
Right. Right.
No, it's very different. And then like we repeated that with ISIS. ISIS was actually, well, they were targeting Americans, but not really. They actually were targeting more Muslims. We went under the Trump administration, just like finished them off. There were no protests. There was like nothing, and like we were going on land that doesn't belong to us. And so unfortunately, like we know when Jews are being chastised for taking care of the problem on our own land, this is where history comes into play. That's where, like advocacy, not so much, but like, hey, this is historical reality. And this is what needs to be done in order for the region, the complete region, not to implode, because that easily could happen, right? Like what happens in Israel doesn't always stay in Israel. It goes.
I mean, the hypocrisy is mind-boggling, but
Yeah.
I
But
knew that the pro-Israel sort of sentiment and empathy post October 7th would not last long. And obviously for some people it has lasted, but I knew that there would shortly after be protests and rallies and all that, because those who want to disparage Israel will do so. And,
because
I do believe, the Israel Project, which was around in past years, did a study once that I remember, where it said, there's people like you and I who are sort of souls and in the in the tents, so to speak, and you don't need to convince us to be pro-Israel. There's other people on the other side who you don't need to convince to be anti-Israel. They're going to stay that way and we can't change their minds. The ones who are out there, tearing down Israeli posters and shouting down speakers and all that, most of them, maybe there's a few here and there who do change their mind, like the son of Hamas, obviously, and some others. But there's a vast majority of the populace in the middle who are ignorant, indifferent, naive, and who have other priorities, and those are the people that we need to educate.
absolutely. And that's who I'm personally targeting. And it's working. Like, half my followers on Instagram are not Jews.
That's great.
They always say like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this fact or that fact, or myself. Like I was part of that vast middle for 20 years. And if someone had come to me during those 20 years and explained the actual facts, I would not have continued to be anti-Israel. But just again, it was that information that kept being in my in my sphere. So it was like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, like how could I be pro-Israel when they're doing XYZ to the poor Palestinians or stealing land? And I can go like on and on and on. Like I just sent out, I have a newsletter every week. So I just sent out like the top 10 anti-Semitic lies and how to combat with facts. And that's what it takes. It's like the facts, and then what you're doing at your university, you're taking it in a different angle, which is just as effective, even more so, because again, like your university just expanded, it's not shutting down, and it's showing what actual coexistence entails,
Yeah.
right? Like it's hard work, but it's a possibility. It's not something that's a fantasy.
Right. And I just, like I said, if a fraction of this vast middle knew that reality, I would be happy, you know? And every day I get to teach someone something new. I get to meet with someone. I get to talk to someone. I love that aspect of my job. We have supporters from many different backgrounds across the country, obviously not just Jews. And that's really, really gratifying. Our alumni stay in touch from all different backgrounds, and people are really proud to have graduated. One other fun fact about University of Haifa that I'm personally really proud of is that a large percentage of our population is first generation to go to college or university. So again, people are coming to University of Haifa not just to party and have fun, like a lot of American universities, or to protest, as they did at Brown recently, to starve themselves for ceasefire for days and then
For
quit.
12 hours, was it? Right. And they were like, oh my gosh, we're doing so much. I'm like, that's a
Yeah,
whole
they eventually quit because they got hungry. But I would not have lasted that long. But they come there because they're serious about their studies, and their parent, and the majority are also women and girls, by the way. They come there and they come from families who want them to get an education, want them to succeed, want them to be productive, educated professionals in Israeli society. They're not there to just, mess around. They're serious about their education. And again, that's another reason why it's different in American colleges and universities where, it's just a different lifestyle here. So I think that's another reason why you don't see protests. They want to graduate and they want to succeed and they want to give back to Israel. So I think it's a very patriotic thing to do, to go to University of Haifa. It really speaks volumes that they choose to do that. They don't need to get an education. They don't need to go to college, university. They could stay in their towns and villages and do other jobs of different kinds, but they choose to move ahead in life and to progress their families and their communities beyond where they are. And yet another reason why I love Haifa is so many people love Jerusalem, love Tel Aviv, which of course are great cities. I lived in Jerusalem as a kid. I love going to Tel Aviv. Also, our family used to have a home in Jerusalem, etc. But so many people come to Israel and they only see the center of the country. They go to Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and they go back home. That's great, but there's so much need in the north and in the south, and in the Galil, where Haifa is, and in the Negev. That's where there's less population density, there's less economic mobility, there's less educational opportunities, there's fewer professional opportunities. That's really where the greatest need is. That's a lot more disparity. People think of Israel as a startup nation, as this really successful country, which it is in many ways. It's a first world country now. It's a tech boom. It's got amazing innovation and a lot of success and a lot of wealth now. But if you go to the north or the south, you see a different world.
Absolutely.
And I really encourage people to do it just to see all of Israel. It's a tiny country. It's the size of New Jersey. It doesn't take long to see the whole country, but you need to see the whole country to really get a sense of it. And I encourage anyone who's looking to support Israel, support the periphery. Don't just support those who already have a lot of opportunity. Support those who really, if you give them a scholarship, it's going to do wonders for them and for their community. So that to me is another reason I like to give back. My parents, my dad was the first in his family to go to college and ended up becoming a university president, so he's an epitome of the American dream. They're both university professors who always taught me the importance of education. I always saw how much education can do for them and our family and others. And I believe more than anything in education. So I think giving people that leg up right now, again, especially from the periphery, from disadvantaged communities, is super important.
Thank you so much for all your important work. And it was such an honor, Naomi, to have you on as the first guest. You definitely set a precedent for the rest of the season. And it's something that I was debating, right? Like there's so many webinars and, talks right now on post October 7th, like what's appropriate, what's not. Is it worth it? Is it worth adding to the conversation? And having you on as a guest proved that it is. There's always something new to be said, something new to be shared. Everyone has a different perspective. Everyone has different strengths that they're contributing to the rebuilding of post October 7th Israel and the Jewish society. And you have definitely opened a lot of eyes. So thank you so much. Also, please send me any links related to the University of Haifa. And when this episode will be posted, we will have the links underneath. So
Thank you
thank you
so much.
so much for your time. And yes, I need to definitely maybe hang out with you in Haifa sometime as
Yeah,
well.
let me know when you're going. I'll be there end of May to early June.
That time I can't, but next time you're going to be there.
Next time.
Definitely will.
I try to go when I can. And thank you again for having me. This was super fun. I know we scheduled an hour and we spoke for over 2. So
It'll be worth it because it's different topics of conversation, right? Like
totally.
usually.
And I could keep talking with you for,
Okay,
and I hope to see you soon in New York or Miami too. And thank you to your audience. Like you said, like it's wonderful that you have an audience that's so, diverse and mixed and are curious and open to learning more. I think that's so important these days.
Thank you so much. All right, so I want to wish you Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful weekend, and yes, I hope to see you. We'll all be down in Miami or in Florida, maybe in April for an event.
Okay.
So
Let me know.
okay,
Let me know.
have a
Talk
good
soon.
day.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Goodbye.